the Azure DevOps User Group. This is actually the first meeting where we are going to be called the Azure DevOps User Group. Previously, we've been known as the Microsoft DevOps User Group, of course, with the big announcement from Microsoft yesterday. And I gave a little bit of a preface to it. We're actually changing our name to align better. So the URL will be changing probably over the next month. But as you see on the screen, we've been the Microsoft DevOps User Group, and now that Visual Studio Team Services is essentially relaunched and quite a bit different. We're going to cover that today as Azure DevOps Services. We're going to modify the name of the group a little bit to align with that. So if this is the first time that you are tuning in and joining us, you can't see the screen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, let's fix that. Share screen. All right, you can see the screen now. There we go. If this is the first time that you are tuning in to the Azure DevOps User Group, welcome. You can find us on meetup.com. You can see that on the screen. And just since December, we have 256 members, and we've had some fantastic guests like Brian Harry and Donovan Brown and many others, and you can see those on the YouTube channel. We're going to look at some other syndication options as well, just to make it easier to access past content. We're recording everything. And if you know a speaker who would do really well to present to the group, or even have a panel discussion in various forms, use the meetup site and send in that comment, and we'll work to get them scheduled and get them online. Now, today's meeting is about Azure DevOps Services and diving into that. But we also have a really excited meeting already scheduled in November with Harry Mean on DevSecOps, on the security aspect. And we have several options. Stay tuned for October and December. We're going to fill up that schedule. And again, if you have somebody who would do a really good job presenting or sharing a success story, or even just a demo, just let us know. This is a user group. It is for the people that engage. And so we sort of headquartered out of Austin, Texas, but with a national reach. And the focus of this group is for people who are developing and shipping software on the Microsoft platform, Visual Studio based software. And while there's so many other technologies out there, this group is for those who live and breathe on Windows servers and Visual Studio day in and day out, and are adopting DevOps methods and DevOps practices and shipping software and getting better at that. So for a little bit of logistics, you can use the Q&A panel to put in any questions, and the chat is always there as well. And if you are equipped with a microphone and a webcam, then go ahead and make that known in the chat and raise your hand, and we can actually enable your microphone and video to bring you in on that channel as well. So let's go ahead and dive into the material. All right. So again, we are doing a special launch presentation, and I'm your host, Jeffrey Palermo, but I'm also your presenter for today. And we're going to dive right in. Today in the US, it is the 11th of September, so want to make sure we never forget the event in 2001 and pay respect to all the people involved and the people that lost their lives. So it's a day that we coincided with, and it's just want to pay those respects as we get going. All right, so Azure DevOps has new URLs, new hashtag. It is everything that was known as Visual Studio Team Services is now known as Azure DevOps. Team Foundation Server, or TFS, for people running it on premise, is now Azure DevOps Server. And then for those of us running Visual Studio Online or Visual Studio Team Services, VSTS, that's now Azure DevOps Services. And so there's a whole host of new URLs that you can get to. Also, Microsoft did a live stream just earlier this morning, and if you do a search, they'll be posting that content, so you can see demos straight from the Azure DevOps Services team. And Microsoft is also doing some live streaming tomorrow with the .NET Conf 2018, and the next day with Jeffrey Fritz, and some live coding and setting up some pipelines live. So make sure to stay tuned in for that. All right. Now, another community thing that we're kicking off kind of in conjunction with the Azure DevOps user group is the Azure DevOps Podcast. And you can go to www.azuredevops.show, and you can listen to the first episode today. The podcast launched yesterday, just a few hours after Microsoft made the announcement. And Buck Hodges, the director of engineering for all of Azure DevOps Services, was the first guest. And so we had a premier guest. It's a podcast that I launched kind of as an offshoot of these community activities around Azure DevOps and essentially shipping software in the Microsoft platform. You can subscribe with the RSS feed there, and you can also go to the Twitter handle. But the first episode is online, and if you remember one URL, it's just azuredevops.show. And you can listen either in a web browser, you can go to that URL on your phone and just tap the play button, or you can put the RSS feed into your podcast reader. For iPhone people on iTunes, it takes a little bit for the directory to approve the listing, so that'll be a few more days. But with the RSS feed, if you'd like to subscribe, you can do that. So that's kind of exciting, and we have some really other exciting guests that are already recorded and are currently being produced. I won't spill the beans on that, but we've got a rock star lineup. So tune into that podcast if you're shipping software on the Microsoft platform. Okay, let's get in here. So this is all baseline content around the launch of Azure DevOps Services, and the whole project reinforces that DevOps is a union of people, process, and products around delivering software to end users, and DevOps being an extension of the Agile Manifesto. One of the first principles of the manifesto for Agile software development is to continuously deliver valuable software to our users continuously. So continuous is a watchword, and you see there's 6 categories here. And I want to dive in, not just blaze through here. I'll touch on this later, but we have these categories: build and test, develop, plan and track, monitor, operate, deploy. And from a sequencing perspective, you're really going to make your plans first. And then when you make a plan, you're going to make a hypothesis. Think the scientific method. You're going to make a hypothesis, and you're going to say, I think that if we make this change to the software or add this feature, that it will have some positive benefit when running it in production, either positive benefit to our revenue or the users, our employees' productivity, or some other positive outcome. And so it's worth doing this feature. Now, you don't know if that feature is good. And actually, there's some research out there that shows that about a third of the time you're right and has a positive outcome. About a third of the time you're wrong and it actually hurts things. And about a third of the time it has no impact whatsoever, and people don't even use it. There's old studies, I'm dating myself, in the desktop world, where you had these big desktop packages, and think Microsoft Word in the 90s and even till now, where 60% of the features of a piece of desktop software was not even used at all, or very, very so rarely used that was inconsequential. Well, corollary, so much of the software these days is web software that they could either not use it, or when you make a change, a third of the time it helps, a third of the time it hurts, and a third of the time it's no difference or nobody even uses it. And so you don't know which one it is. It's a hypothesis. And so we build and test. We develop the feature, then we build and test, then we deploy it, then we operate it and keep it running and make sure that it's available, make sure that it's fast. But then the monitor and learn is so important in the DevOps process, because we have to get all the way around so that we can learn if that change was in fact a good thing to do. Because if we have a 2/3 chance of it not being a good thing to do, and we need to take it out, we need to change it. So, so the DevOps pipelines give us a super fast cycle time, because the longer it goes between envisioning a change and finding out if that change was in fact good for the business, the longer that takes, the more impact that we will have if for the 2/3 of the time that it was not a good thing to do. All right. So we need a really, really fast cycle time. That's our overall continuous delivery pipeline. But then we need the monitoring and the learning so that we know what was good and what was bad, and we can constantly keep adjusting. So that's different focus than just agile processes and the Scrum training, where the product owner knows and the product owner prioritizes, and then we do what the product owner says, and it goes out to production, and everything's great because the product owner is always right. The research has shown us that the product owner is right 1/3 of the time. So that's a really, really key benefit that DevOps brings to the Agile table. And I'll credit Sam Guggenheimer at Microsoft for sharing that little bit of information with me. That was really eye-opening. So Microsoft has also participated in the 2018 Accelerate State of DevOps report, and the research shows that for people implementing DevOps, they have anecdotally, and executives report, faster time to market, increased revenue. Of course, we don't have stats on that, but objectively, 46 times greater deployment frequency, 2,555 times faster lead time for change, meaning shorter lead time, over 2,600 times faster mean time recovery of a problem, and 7 times lower, or 1/7 of the change failure rate. So really, really good results from people who are implementing DevOps. So how Azure DevOps Services helps is by providing all this infrastructure so that a DevOps workflow and a DevOps environment is accessible to everybody. It's flexible, powerful, and open, and you can do it on premise. You can have your software and source control on premise. You can have it in the cloud, and it's pretty comprehensive. So Microsoft is really pushing the message that it's for any platform, any type of code, on any operating system, anywhere, and it has the breadth to deliver. So the technologies, some of the key things, and I talked about, coming full circle with monitoring and learning, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and continuous learning. So when it comes to putting in place this pipeline, which is your infrastructure that enables the development team to really go fast and have a short cycle time, which also increases quality. These are the 3 concepts. And whether or not you continuously deploy to production, that's just a detail. Sometimes it's also called continuous delivery. Having automated deployment capabilities, where we make a change to software, we automatically make a build, label it, package up a release candidate. Then we have the capability to automatically deploy it to any number of environments. And then we have the ability to observe it in production and learn what people are doing. Okay. So there's other ways that people represent the competencies of DevOps. This is actually the graphic from Wikipedia, and it shows 7 different competencies instead of 6, because they include a package step. But however you categorize it up, there are only a finite number of competencies of DevOps. And so when you think about, okay, if I'm adopting it, what are the things that I need to do? There's not a million things you need to do. There's only a handful. So it's very doable. Okay, so what is Azure DevOps? It's actually broken up now, and it's five different modules. And whereas before, if you've used uh, Visual Studio Team Services before, you thought, oh, I have code, I have work tracking, I have artifacts, I have builds and releases and test plans and all these things. But if you think, oh, well, maybe my code is in GitHub, what they've done with VSTS is they've broken up VSTS into five different independent modules. Now they all work really well together because they're all part of the same overall product ecosystem, but they're five different products now. Azure Boards is for tracking work. And actually here at Clear Measure in the marketing department, we've actually migrated from, and we did this when we had inside access with a feature flag. We migrated from Trello to Azure Boards. It was work item tracking, but it's now called Azure Boards. And so it's worked pretty well. Just if you need to track work for any purpose, any project, you can use Basecamp or Trello or any of those more lightweight, what you thought was lightweight tracking, but then they break down because they don't have the full sophistication of capabilities. Whereas if you just want to track something, Azure Boards. So there it is. Azure Test Plans. If you've used load testing or the coded web UI tests or even manual regression test tracking, Azure Test Plans is a standalone testing product. And if you've never used the high capacity load testing part of Azure Test Plans, use it. It leverages Azure on the back end, and it's just amazing. If you have something where you don't know the capacity, or if you say, you know what, we need to make sure that this stays up. If you're Domino's Pizza for Super Bowl Sunday, and you have the question, what if we have 100 times the load over the course of 3 hours? Is our system gonna fall down? Is it gonna crash? Well, you have no way of testing it easily except the load testing in Azure Test Plans. It spins up Azure VMs like like there's no tomorrow in Azure on a dynamic basis. So you only pay for the minutes that you're actually using. And if you want to run a 30-minute or a 1 hour load test with 10, 20,000 users, all going through the same progression through your web application, and maybe pushing in some test data into SQL Server, it's really easy to configure, and you can do that. Azure Artifacts is essentially Maven and NuGet, all the package managers that are bundled up, so that any type of package, Node.js, any type of repository, you can have a private package repository in Azure Artifacts. And Azure Repos is essentially your Git hosting. You can also host TFVC if you still have some of those, but it's essentially your private Git repository, and you can have it just be hosting source control. If you already have, say, TeamCity for a build server, or anything else, if you're deploying with Octopus Deploy and TeamCity, but you want to upgrade your code from some other type of server or Subversion, or if you still have your code somewhere, you could spin up an Azure Git repository and stick it in there and continue using the rest of your infrastructure. And then, of course, Azure Pipelines, which everything seems to hover around, is building and deploying any language, any platform, any runtime environment, any cloud. And of course, GitHub is being integrated as a super first class citizen. Of course, with the announced acquisition from Microsoft, that makes sense. All right. So I'll blaze through this. This information is being put in the docs, so this isn't unique information, but what's really interesting and new, and I'm just going to show a few things in a web browser as we go through this that I found interesting. So let me get there. So I have a dev.azure.com/clearmeasurelabs is kind of the public one that we're setting up here. And the URLs are different. If, for instance, I could go to dev.azure.com/clearmeasurelabs, or I could say clearmeasurelabs.visualstudio.com, and it is the same thing. Both work identical. So notice Azure DevOps up in the left-hand corner. If you're a VSTS user, you see a lot of interesting things. But if I go over to my test project here and just go to builds, something that is expanding and is kind of exciting is if I edit a build configuration, and I'll come back and show these in a minute. This is expanding. So you might have heard that if you have an Xcode application, iPhone app or whatnot, you can actually build on a hosted Mac OS. You have two Linux varieties, and look at this, hosted Windows container. So this one is a VM with the latest version of Visual Studio installed, and then a hosted Windows container. So the number of targets for building continues to expand, and that's really interesting. And of course, you can create your own private build agents. This is essentially where you're using Azure DevOps Services, but the computer that actually runs the build script is under your control, and you can put it in Azure. But here's the secret: you can also install the build agent on your own workstation, and or if you have a spare laptop sitting around, you can install the build agent on a spare laptop and stick it on a desk. Around our office, we have multiple spare computers, not just one. So there's no shortage of spare computers, and all you have to do is install the build agent and just get it running. And then you have a dedicated always on build server, or 4 or 10, depending on how many you want to connect, and they're always on. So the hosted ones, man, it's so flexible. But the benefit of having the private build agents is that they're always on, they're always dedicated to you. Whenever you spin up a build configuration, the hosted path always takes a little bit of time to locate a suitable computer and then provision it and clean it and get that image on there, so that it doesn't have any residue from anything that's done in the past, and then start running your build. And that can sometimes add uh, 30 seconds onto a build time. Whereas if you have your own servers ready to go, and by the way, if you have a quad core i7 with 8 GB of RAM, that's a pretty decent server if you're hosting it in Azure. Whereas if you have a laptop that nobody's using anymore, that's that kind of specs, that's a pretty good computer to run builds on. So if you're also a MSDN premium, or if you have the Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, which every professional developer should be subscribing to, that's the tool belt that you should have, then there's no upcharge pricing for any number of private build pipelines. It's because they're included with the Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. So I wanted to share that because that's kind of interesting. But Kubernetes is not quite there as a but it's coming. It's coming. And Windows containers are also being worked on. So Satya Nadella, the new CEO of Microsoft, has made a lot of changes from a core values perspective and a drive. And then Microsoft's mission statement is to help everyone on the planet achieve more. And Scott Guthrie, a corporate vice president who's taken over Azure, and he's also taken over Windows. It's kind of early, so we'll see what happens in the Windows area. But there's been a huge shift from, if you use Microsoft, you need to use all of Microsoft, to embracing open source and embracing a whole community feel. Instead of competing with sharp elbows, it's competing with open arms, but winning customers and competing by being the best, and have that be the focus, as opposed to sharp elbows, even if we're not the best. So That's a big culture change, and it shows. There's a progression in open source from 2012 to 2018 that's pretty interesting, and I've kind of lived the whole gamut. I remember being in some sessions with the uh, which was a Visual Studio Online, where they had uh, TFS source control, and then a lot of people were adopting Git, and that was in 2011. And I was in a private design review at the Microsoft campus, and we had a discussion about why not just embed a Git server into the actual product, because people are using Git. Even people in the room that were lifelong .NET developers are using Git source control, and so that was a big shift because they went ahead and did it. And I want to call out Martin Woodward for his leadership in doing that. And then there's been a progression over the years where now VS Code is actually the most popular code editor for Node.js development and a whole host of other non.NET languages. Although there's lots of people that are starting to use it for C# as well. And Windows is on Git in Azure DevOps Services, and the Windows source code is the largest Git repository in the world. So that's pretty amazing. All right, now here is the big announcement. Azure Pipelines is essentially free for open source. Now there's a few limitations, up to 10 free parallel jobs across Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, but for all intents and purposes, there's no barriers. It's completely free, and it's really easy to get started. You can make public projects. So I've been toying around with it in GitHub, and I'm just gonna come over here, and what I've done is I have a GitHub repository called Battleship. So if you go to github.com/clearmeasurelabs, there's a bunch of open source projects, and one of them is a Battleship console application. And so it's just, here it is. You can go to it. And I went through the process and I said, what would it take just to run through their wizard? Is it really easy to get started? I mean, I didn't do a whole bunch of analysis. I just said, how quickly can I get a CI build up and running? And this base template it throws down was okay, good enough for getting started. So we have a few builds for Battleship, and what it did is it built it, and it took what was being built and put it in artifacts. So if I download the zip file, and let's see, there's a few warnings, so some things I need to set up. And right off the bat, I can essentially have an open source project, get it built, what did it build, and go in here, and okay, it did its thing, started up, and I can play console ASCII art Battleship. Pretty darn cool, right? So anyway, if I come back over here and go to project settings, and you see the publicity is public. So any one of you ought to be able to go to this URL, and I'll put it in the chat window. You should be able to go to that URL, and it should come up because it's public. And so you can just somebody test it out and see if in fact it works as advertised. And I'll change the URL to be the new URL. And again, if we take this URL and I will paste it into the chat window, and somebody click on it and let me know if that one works. Because I had public set for the project, which for open source, you want to do that, and you can change this and from public to private. So there it is. So for public projects, here's the limitations. Now they're still working on it. And so if you click on some links, it'll kind of give you an error message. If it's just someone anonymous, not logged in on the internet, obviously they can't force a build and they can't modify your build and things like that. So, all right, we'll keep on going. All right. So if anybody has a project on GitHub, now is the time. Oh, I need to show you the way to get on board with GitHub. So if I'm on, let's take another one, and let's see here. VS Live Design, no, Harvest, Alexa skill. This is, there we go. And I'm going to look at this one, go to the marketplace. And in the marketplace, just follow along, go down here and type Azure Pipelines. All right. And in Azure Pipelines, there it is. I'm going to click on it. So I've already done this once, but if I set up a new plan, install it for free, for open source, there's plenty for free. There we go. And then $0. What organization? It's going to be Clear Measure Labs. Complete and begin installation. And permissions. And there we go. All repositories for Clear Measure Labs. And so if I come back and just go to pipelines, yeah, let's go ahead and leave. And this is going to be, there's one gotcha. If you go to GitHub and then just select one of these guys and just say, well, let's do Battleship. We'll do a new one. It is going to create a YAML configuration. Now, the YAML builds is a really good direction. There's no designer yet for YAML builds, and the marketplace for build tasks really works well in the visual designer, and it's not as discoverable in the YAML build. So if I go back and say, go back here, let's use the visual designer. It's really just as easy. If I go to GitHub and the repository, there we go, Battleship, let's select it, master branch, continue. Let's not use YAML, but use the .NET Desktop. We can apply that template. And now when we're modifying it and going into the marketplace, then we still have lots of discoverability and can kind of figure out what's there. But if, let's just leave it as, let's do user group, Battleship CI, save and queue. There we go. I didn't even modify the build number, but so build number, and then it gives it a date based. I like using Semver. But anyway, we have this and it's running and it's going to do the same thing. So it's pretty darn awesome. So if anybody has a GitHub repository, that's all it takes to set up a free build server. And if you have a open source project that essentially the production environment is publishing to NuGet so that other people can grab your NuGet package and use your library, then you also have free release configurations so that you can create a deployment to NuGet.org, because your production environment is essentially NuGet.org and you want to be able to deploy new releases. All that infrastructure is free, provided for you. And you can make your project public so that other people can see the builds and whatnot in the deployments. And so that's pretty awesome. So if you have any open source projects, it's super easy to get started and get a build server. Or if your build is somewhere else, it's really easy to convert it over. All right, Azure Boards. It's essentially just Kanban boards, backlogs, team dashboards, custom reporting, and Azure repos. Again, your Git repositories. A little bit about test plans. There's once you have lots of tests, of course, things start to light up. And load testing is also really interesting. The artifacts, I touched on that. It has NuGet, uh, NuGet, NPM, and Maven packaging there. And of course, they all kind of work together. So there is a big runtime ecosystem around Azure, and the breakup of VSTS into these individual products, and then more aligning and integrating more tightly with Azure, is essentially along the lines of Microsoft modifying and pushing Azure to be a world-class development platform rather than just a cloud data center or a cloud hosting platform. Also, something that is really interesting, and there's a lot of support for it in the Azure portal, and there will be more and more support for it in Azure DevOps Services itself, is the infrastructure as code and configuration as code, which are two different pieces. One is provisioning from a file stored in source control, and the other is making a change or controlling configuration drift by automation. And so one of the things that Microsoft has done is hired Stephen Morosky. He used to work for Chef, and he is starting a new cloud ops team, and there's positions open that he's hiring for right now. And so they are going to be essentially pouring gasoline on the whole infrastructure as code for Windows services area. So, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack, all those, work in Azure. And if you're using Linux, then things work great. Some of the stuff work for Windows, but for Windows Server, there's a lot more that's possible. And so, Steve Morosky is leading that team, and there's going to be a lot more coming. So stay tuned on that front. All right. So on the application insights, there's going to be a lot more integration with Azure DevOps Services and this Azure service, the monitor, insights, and log analytics. But there's also they're also integrating more with other third-party tools. There's a lot of big companies using it. Just some information, and here's some stats that's interesting from Microsoft. And you can find these on aka.ms/devops at Microsoft. 78,000 deployments per day are being run through Azure DevOps Services. But that is not for all customers. That's only for internal Microsoft teams. So 500 million test executions. That's just a lot of activity going on. And this is if you look up in the URL, MSeng is the organization for this Azure DevOps Services account, and this is actually one of the pipelines for the VS Online project, which is now Azure DevOps. So, and you can see some of the add-ins on the left that they use, White Source Bolt being one of them. So that's interesting to see how they use it. I've already covered the change in the URL. That is one of the changes. The new UI is an opt-in per user as a preview feature, but more and more of the accounts are being converted over, and you can go back. You can go back to the old UI if you need a little bit more time. TFS will rev in 2019, and so it'll be Azure DevOps Server in 2019. If you have friends that are on TFS, or if you're on TFS, then there will be a new TFS in spring of 2019, but it will be called Azure DevOps Server, and it will be more modular. And if you enable everything, then it'll be a clean upgrade path from where you are with your existing TFS. All right, just blaze on through here. Small teams continue to be free. So here's the best way. If you have a Visual Studio Pro or Enterprise subscription or MSDN, you already have Azure DevOps Services. So if there's a discussion of, hey, we should use it, and then someone says, no, we're already paying for Bamboo, or we're already paying for Team City or something else, um, then just know that you're already paying for Azure DevOps Services, that you already have it. If you are a Visual Studio Enterprise or MSDN subscriber, and then of course, if you want some open source pipelines, well, those are free too. If you have Visual Studio Pro, then you will not have Azure Artifacts. That is one wrinkle. To have a fully, a hair on fire continuous delivery pipeline, you do need to publish your application components as NuGet packages. And so you will need Azure Artifacts. That's just one wrinkle if you happen to have a Visual Studio Pro subscription, but not a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. All right. I already showed a sample of how to quickly set up a build pipeline. And one thing I did wanted to show you just some specifics on what the name is and what the name is not, because some people don't say Azure or Azure. Well, Microsoft says Azure, and it's Azure DevOps Services and Azure DevOps Server. There's no abbreviation really. Some people might try, but there's really no abbreviation that they're using for it. And there are individual URLs for the different products and individual icons. From a icon perspective, they're really only using the Azure DevOps Services overall icon. They're not really branding the individual products from a kind of product branding perspective. And then here's all the various icons that they're using. So if you're putting together a presentation for your boss or some peers, you can just kind of screen grab that little section there. And that is that. And so are there any questions that we didn't get answered in line? I'll kind of take a look here. That was kind of a lot to get through, but it's a pretty big shift, because there's two huge takeaways. One is I can use just the product that I need to, and if I'm using another build server, then I can use the release hub for deployments. And one thing that the marketplace is so huge for the release hub within Azure Pipelines. One of my favorite marketplace extensions is the Octopus Deploy extension, because it has such a huge library of different ways to configure applications that are on virtual machines and all kinds of cloud services. And the release hub is such a great orchestrator. And then as a build or a release step, I can tell Octopus Deploy, hey, go do something. And so if the build server for somewhere happens to be Bamboo or Team City, then we can take a build and then we can use Azure Pipelines Release Hub to orchestrate the deployment. And then we could even use some tools in the marketplace like Octopus Deploy to do some of the heavy lifting, just depending on what our destination is. So everything integrates really nicely, and you can mix and match. So one question in the chat is, how do they have a single YAML for Windows, Linux, and Mac? So they're not going to have a single YAML for Windows, Linux, and Mac. And let me show you the screen again. And when you have a build configuration, you pretty much choose which one you want to do. So if we come back here, go to one of the builds, and let's just say I'm going to edit this guy. This build is either Windows or Linux or Mac. This is C#. So I'm not going to build C# on a Mac. If it's .NET Core, okay, I could build it on Ubuntu Linux. But you're going to pick one. So one build, the relationship for a build configuration to a operating system or build agent operating system is a one-to-one relationship. You're not going to have multiple agents for one build configuration. So if instead of using this type, instead of using the visual designer, if I have YAML, then it's still going to be one type of agent pool. I think I have this guy. Let me just make sure which one. I have, yeah, here's the YAML file. So we have one build configuration, and we have the YAML file that's here, and then we still choose what to do. So if I, let's see if we can look at this guy. All right, it ran, and then well, there's no link directly to the YAML unless I'm, oh, here we go. I think it links over to the GitHub repository. Oh, it's in, I think it's in develop. No, it's not. That's interesting. I was going to show you the YAML file. But anyway, there's one YAML file for a build configuration and one pool type. So hope that answers the question. Any other questions before we wrap up? I know there's a lot of content to get through, but some of the there's lots of resources. I mean, all you got to do, azure.com/DevOps. That's the main URL, and there's links to so much information. There's going to be lots more to come on this site. I mean, they kind of describe, and they have little video clips of all the different parts of Azure DevOps Services. So also for the .NET Conf 2018, that is actually tomorrow morning. So here's the link here, .NET Conf, and go to this date, 21 hours and 55 minutes to go. That's essentially tomorrow. There's going to be a live keynote event at the Microsoft Store in Austin, Texas, as well as live streaming all over. And so that's exciting for tomorrow. And then there's going to be more live streaming around Azure DevOps Services the day after. So the agenda, actually, go to the, oh, wow, we need some DevOps on .NET Conf local events. Too many requests. Well, if everybody keeps doing this, then it'll be too many requests all the time, won't it? All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and stay tuned for the next showing of the now rebranded Azure DevOps user group. Thanks everyone, and keep shipping.